Excellent. So a little bit about seed programs itself. Our organization was established about 25 years ago by John Batcha, who was with Asgrow Vegetable Seeds. And he saw this opportunity to ensure that seed that was going to be discarded could be used to support households and organizations with a need to grow food. And so our organization has evolved from there to be more generally involved in seed access and supporting the seed sector in terms of enabling programs and growers to access quality seed of improved varieties or varieties that are appropriate for their growing conditions. And then, of course, the information that is supportive of growing those varieties. So that's what our organization does. We're a small organization. We work, within our specific skill set area and work with implementing partners to support them. So we don't have a bunch of offices around the world or boots on the ground. We're a small team of 3 people, and we focus on our expertise in order to assist others in the areas that we operate best in. That's a nice segue into talking about Milcah Kigoni. Dr. Milcah Kigoni is on staff as our partnerships and programs director, and she recently completed her PhD at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and is an expert in oats and knows a lot about other small grains and plant breeding, as well as the intersection with agronomy and what grows where, well, and why. Milcah is from Kenya, but currently living in Illinois in the Champaign-Urbana area. Probably, Milcah, I'm not doing justice to all of the details about you and your work. So please, as you kick off this webinar on naked oats, please feel to share a few additional details with the group here.
All right, thank you so much, Brian, and good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to you, Kelvin. Thank you so much, Brian, for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen. Please confirm when you see. Oops, I don't think. Yeah, I think that's the correct one. Can you see the presentation?
I can see it well, Milcah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Great.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So now I'm very glad to be a part of SPI. As Brian mentioned, I joined the team earlier this year, and I'm happy to present this webinar. And of course, because I have spent the last 5 years of my life working on oats, I thought what better crop to talk about than oats. But not just because of that, I think there's a great opportunity for oats in international development work. And I feel like there's a lot that's not known about oats. So let's get to it. So my talk is going to focus on naked oats, and I will tell you more about them. So the talk will have 5 main sections. The origin, we'll talk about the agronomy of naked oats, how they are used, and just some thoughts about the future of this grain in different uses and in different farming contexts, with a special focus on small-scale farming, because most of the partners that we work with are on small-scale farms or low mechanization farms. Then I'll share some resources. So just as an introduction, first of all, this is what an oat plant looks like. I don't like to skip this part because when I started working on oats 5 years ago, I had never seen an oat plant in my life. But it generally looks like a grass, and it has very similar growth patterns as wheat, which is another grass, or something like barley. So if that is closer to you in terms of relevance, then that's what oat looks like. And it's the 7th most produced cereal crop worldwide. I will share a map in the next slide. And it's an annual cool season cereal, so it's adapted to temperate climates or cooler climates. And it also thrives in marginal environments. An example is like places where the soil pH levels are lower. And it is used in many ways in human food. Some of you may already be familiar with it as a breakfast food, but it's also used in livestock feed and forage. And I'll talk more about other uses. And one unique thing about oats, especially among other cereals, it is rich in dietary fiber, vitamins, and essential minerals. And it originated, it shares the same places of origin as wheat and barley, although oats originated as a weed in wheat and barley fields. And it was domesticated approximately 3,000 years ago. So this is a map of the world oat production by country. And by this, I don't mean naked oats. I'll show a map with naked oat distribution, but this is a map of the oat just generally as a crop and where it is produced in the world. It's mostly the color here. The more concentrated orange color shows countries that have higher oat production, and the faded yellow color just shows lower levels. And then what you're seeing in the gray, these are countries where there is low oat production, but also it could mean that data is not available for oat production in those nations. And so it's important to say that so that we don't assume that there's no oat growing in these gray zones. But as you can see, a lot of oat is produced in the EU region. Russia is a leading country, Canada, and these are some of the other nations that produce oats. And among these three, they produce 70% of the world oats. And this is in terms of grain, not forage. So what is naked oat? It's really simple. It's that when the grain, this is what a common oat grain would look like. And it has this cover, or what is called a hull, which is a very thick, fibrous husk. And so after you harvest oats, the common oat will have this hull. But there is a different type of oat called the naked oat or hullless oat. And after you harvest it, it doesn't have this hull. That does not mean that as it's growing, it doesn't have a hull. It simply means that it sheds the hull easily, but common oats retain this hull after they have been harvested. And I should mention that that hull is not digestible. And other differences between common oats and naked oats, if you are looking at it, in a field, for example, you will notice that the common oat, it typically has 2 to 3 grains per spikelet. We call this a spikelet. So you typically see 2 to 3. The middle one typically is not fully formed. So you often get what we call a primary and secondary as part of your harvest. And then in the naked oats, you can get up to 8 grains from one spikelet. But there are differences in terms of seeds also, where you find that the naked oat, the seeds tend to be smaller in terms of dimension, and compared to the common oat, as you can see here, these common oat seeds are much more elongated compared to the naked seed oats. So there are differences even on the seed. And another key, very important difference between the common oat and the naked oat is that the seed weight of the common oat is higher, significantly higher, as we can see here. This is a graph that's showing the weight of 1,000 seeds of common oat versus the weight of 1,000 seeds of naked oats. And as you can see, there are significant differences. So naked oats, generally, the seed is smaller compared to common oats, and it weighs less, but you will get more grains per flower or per spikelet versus the common oats. So those are some of the key differences if you're looking to compare common oats and naked oats. We also have differences between common oats and naked oats in terms of nutrition. The naked oats has higher protein content. Where generally, it's estimated to be around 5% more protein, and it has higher levels of essential amino acid, for example, lysine. It also has higher oil content compared to common oats. As you can see here, looking at the energy and the fat, see that in naked oats we have like 8 to 10%, while in common oats we have 4 to 6%. The other point is that obviously, based on this, the naked oats has higher nutritional density compared to the common oat, because a significant percentage of the grain is the hull, which, like I mentioned earlier, it is not digestible. It is mostly fiber that is insoluble, while the naked oat, because it doesn't have that hull, it has a higher, overall higher amounts of soluble fiber, which are nutritionally beneficial. So we also have agronomic differences between naked oats and common oats. In terms of yield, the common oat yields higher, while the naked oat has lower total weight and also yield. And in terms of processing, after you harvest, and I'll show some pictures later, after you harvest, the common oat requires an extra step, which is to dehull, remove that hull, because, like I say, it is not beneficial, especially in human food. And while in naked oat, once you harvest, there's no dehulling, extra step needed. And this is honestly just the major benefit between for naked oats compared to common oats. In terms of storage, the common oat is highly stable, and this is connected to the higher oil content that is present in naked oats. Because they have a higher oil content, they are more prone to going through what is called rancidity. And so they have a relatively shorter shelf life compared to the common oats. And also another important agronomic difference that's worth mentioning is that naked oat cultivars, they are more prone to shattering and lodging. This is where the oat plant, especially when this happens between flowering to when the plant matures, this is where the plant leans over more than 45 degrees. And once it leans over, sometimes it can recover depending on the stage of the plant, but other times this is just what the field will look like, especially if there has been like high winds or there was a storm. This is what the field will look like. And of course, this contributes to yield loss, because as you are harvesting, unless you are maybe like manually harvesting with a sickle, if you are combining the grain, for example, it's not easy to pick up this grain, and some of it falls and maybe it rains and the grain starts sprouting. So this lowers yield, and it also lowers the quality of the oat grain. So that is an important difference, because it affects the yield and the quality. So what are the origins of naked oats? Well, the research tells us conflicting hypotheses. So the current research, they agree that the naked oat and the hulled or the common oat, they are closely related, and during their evolution, they have exchanged genes. But the research also differs in the sense that earlier research assumed or had the hypothesis that the naked oat was derived from the hard oat, meaning that it is the same species, it's just a differentiation. But in using modern genomic tools, recent studies have shown that it appears that the naked oat and the common oat, they are different even in the processes of evolution. And these are just some of the studies that have been done. So honestly, after looking at this, it seems like it is inconclusive, although most of the research leans more towards the understanding that common oat is not the same as hard oats, as naked oats, sorry, and naked oats were not derived from common oats. And more on the origin and the distribution of naked oat. Naked oat is mainly grown in China, and it is believed to have originated there. And the National Germplasm Bank of China has the most extensive collection of naked oats. If you look at this map here, it's comparing 3 types of oats in the world. Hulled, which is the common, the hull-less in blue, which is the naked, and the wild oats. We see a lot of wild oats here, which is the region where oat as a plant originated. But when we look at how the different types of oats that are being grown in different areas in the world, we can see that in the North Americas, it's mostly the common oats or the hulled oats. While in Europe, it's a bit of a mixture, but it seems like hulled oats still are the most popular. And while in East Asia, Middle to East Asia, it's mostly the hull-less or the naked oats. So this is where naked oats are most grown. So now talking about the agronomy. In this section, I'll focus on like how does the plant grow, what are the considerations, going all the way from seeding to harvest and post-harvest processing. These are the oat growth and development stages, and there are no differences between the common oats and the naked oats in terms of development. Once you plant the seeds, it goes through what is called the emergence stage, and then it moves to a seedling stage, which will have 1 to 3 leaves. And after that, it forms side shoots, or what we call tillers. That's why this stage is called tillering. As you can see here, we've had 1 primary shoot growing, but after a while, you have the emergence of other shoots from the same seed, from the same plant. And this is important because the number of tillers contributes to yield. In terms of forage, you can have more leaves or what we call biomass. And in terms of grain, some of these tillers can mature to give you a full head of grain. And then after tillering, it moves into the booting where the flower is forming, and then heading. This is where you can see the structure where the seeds are located, and then the grains go through maturity, which it will dry up. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but oat is an annual crop. So it's not perennial. It doesn't return year after year. Once you harvest, that's it. You need to plant the seed again. So how do you select a field to grow oats? How do you know a good field that you can plant oats? And what are some of the decisions that are important in terms of crop rotation? It is important to select fields that have good drainage, sandy loam to heavy clay soil textures. Oat is very well adapted also to no-till or reduced tillage fields, which will increase the moisture level. And crop rotation is very important because repeated planting of oats in the same field will lead to build and weeds, which are both difficult to control. So avoid fields with a history of heavy wild oat pressure. So as I mentioned, like when we were looking at the map of the origin of naked oats, we saw that we had common oats, we had naked oats, and wild oats. This is wild oats, and this is a weed, a common weed in fields where you're growing cereal and also where you're growing oats. And the problem in terms of controlling them is that you cannot spray something that is going to kill this and not kill your oats, because this is also an oat. But when you harvest, this wild oat has very small seeds. Really, it decreases the quality of your grain. And of course, it takes away nutrients that should be going to your oat crop. And so because of that, it's important to avoid fields that have a history of having a lot of wild oats. Also avoid fields that have a history of residual herbicides that may affect the growth of oats. So when you look at this photo here, for example, this is a field that has oat, and you can see there's a patch here where the germination is not so uniform. I mean, there are many factors that could affect this, but one of the reasons that this could happen is where you have residual herbicide. So maybe in the previous crop, you used a herbicide and it is still there in the soil, and you come and plant your oats. Then this will affect the uniformity of your crop and how much yield you get, of course, and the quality of the grain. Also avoid fields planted in cereal crops previous years, because this may affect your grain quality because you may have volunteer. So for example, if you had planted wheat in the previous season, and then you follow that with oats, you may have some wheat that fell during harvest, and they come up. And depending on how well you do your weed management, you may be able to remove that wheat in time, but otherwise it will grow, and the two of them will grow together, and it will be really challenging to control that volunteer wheat because they are both grasses. So herbicides don't, they will not be effective in removing the volunteer. And so you may have a harvest where your grain has a lot of other cereals, for example, barley or wheat as an example. So in terms of planting decision, one of the things to think about is the time of seeding oats. Early seeding can result in increased yield and test weight, but it can also affect, and it can effectively reduce the wild oat competition. And also, a delay in seeding can allow for pre-seeding control. So the timing is tricky in the sense that you can plant early, and then that will give oats time to germinate and grow to a certain stage where they can compete better than the weeds before the weeds come up. But at the same time, if you delay seeding, you can allow the weeds to come up, deal with the weeds, maybe go in and weed or spray a herbicide, and then plant your oats. So it all depends. So it all depends on you and which approach you want to take. But this is the key thing to think about as you're deciding when you're going to plant. The other thing is the seeding depth. Emergence generally declines with increasing seeding depths. You should sow oats. You target a depth of 2 to 3 centimeters. If you exceed 8 centimeters, the soil, that may affect, which will generally affect how much seeds will actually transition to or be yielding. Then we have the row spacing. Oat is usually sowed at a row spacing of 18 to 30 centimeter generally, and wider row spacing may lead to increased weed problems. So if you have very big gaps between a row of oats versus the next one, and there is no intercropping, maybe you've not put anything in between those two rows, those are just opportunities for weeds to come up. And so the distance between the rows is very important in that sense. In terms of seeding rate, we aim for a population of 20 to 30 plants, but it depends on which planting method you're going to use, and I'll talk about that later. And also the seeding rate may vary depending on the variety. Some varieties have better emergence than others, or performance, and so the seeding rate may vary. So it's recommended that that as you are getting as you go to get to buy the seed that you're going to plant, it's good to inquire and make sure you have information on the optimal seeding rate for that particular cultivar. And you should also consider the germination and the seedling survival that you expect. Generally, there is an expectation for field mortality rate of 20 to 30%, that you will lose 20 to 30%. And so then you can adjust the seeding rate with this rate in mind. And high seeding rates are a powerful strategy for reducing weeds. For the same reason I explained with row spacing, if you have a high density of plants, that reduces the opportunity for weeds to grow in between them. So how do you prepare the field to plant? It's important to create a well-structured soil and to give optimal soil nutrients before you plant. A compacted or waterlogged ground stalls the roots and invites seedling diseases. So it's important to make sure that the soil has been turned, or like it has been well tilled before you plant. It's also very important to sample the soil and test it for the nutrients, essential nutrients, and also measure the pH. For oats, the optimum pH is between 6 to 6.5. And the major micronutrients that matter are especially nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, manganese, zinc, and copper. Generally, 100 bushel per acre, which translates to 3,548 kilograms per hectare, oat crop requires total nitrogen of 97 to 117 pounds, which translates to 110 to 131 kilograms per hectare. And when you get soil tests done, sometimes they will provide recommendations for nutrients. And so that is a good benefit. If you're not sure what is the nutrient level of your soil, this is why it's really important to go ahead and get a soil test, because that will also help you to get the recommended application. There are many approaches to planting oats, depending on location, depending on culture, depending on resources, the level of mechanization, and also the modernization in that region. So these are just pictures of some of the equipment or methods that you can use for planting. Down below, you can see a very common method, which is called broadcasting. And then here, this is just using a planter, same here, but powered by different sources of energy. Here they're using plants, and here they're using a tractor. And this is like, you can use this one, which may, you can just pull it or drag it in the field, and you put your seeds here, and it will place or drill your seeds. So these three methods here are drilling. That's what that method is called. And this one is broadcast method. So an important question is, which method is better? And while I was at the U of I, at the university recently, I did a study using hull-less naked oats to compare germination and emergence if you only sprinkle the seeds at the top versus if you cover the seeds with soil. And this was about, I think, an inch or so of soil. And what we observed, this is T50, or the number of days from planting to 50% of the seeds having been germinated. And here we are comparing the broadcast method versus the drill methods. And we can see that it takes significantly much less time or number of days for the oats for a pot of oats to have 50% of them germinated. Even here visually, you can see like the ones that are broadcasted versus the ones that are drilled, quote unquote, in terms of simulating this in a greenhouse. That we can see that this, although they were planted at the same time, and they are most of them, we are also replicating to make sure it's the same genotype or the same cultivar, we can see that the germination was much sooner when the seed was covered versus when it is left bare. So if you're going to use the broadcasting method, you need to go a bit more in terms of your seeding rate than the recommended rate, because you have to account for how much of this is not going to germinate simply because of the oats not having good seed and soil contact. It's a very important thing for germination of oats and other cereals. Another thing may be before planting, if you're going to use the broadcast method, it's important to make sure like you scratch the field so that the soil is a bit loose at the top. And also they recommend that you can plant just before rain so that the seeds that are broadcasted, they will have high moisture. The soil has high moisture content while it is germinating. So that's a very important thing to note. And this experiment was all done with naked oats. So after you plant, how long does it take oats to germinate? Overall, 7 to 8 days when the soil temperature stays between this level, given that there is steady moisture, is very important during germination. But when conditions are optimum and for some early generation, or not early generation, but some varieties have the capacity to emerge quickly, more quickly than others. And some of them can emerge even as early as 3 days after you have planted. And this is one of the key advantages of growing oats versus other cereals. Cold soil that is below 7 degrees Celsius, it pushes germination 2 to 3 weeks. So the temperature is very important. Moisture is also very important. And it's important to start scouting your field even 3 days after you have planted. And this, being able to scout or walk the fields, it really helps you to maybe know if you need to go in and plant again to make up for the ones that have not germinated. So what about nutrition deficiencies? How do you spot them after you have planted? I have here a resource, and after this presentation, if you're interested in any of these resources, this presentation is being recorded, but I can also email you some of these resources. This is a very important one that shows how to identify and diagnose oat nutrient deficiencies. But here the main point is that it's very important to monitor the crop after you've planted, because things can change very quickly. And if you catch it early, you'll be able to take the necessary steps. And also, nutrient deficiencies may affect the quality of the grain that you get. Protein content of oat grain mainly depends on the variety, but it can be affected by the level of available nitrogen and sulfur. So if you don't, if you are planting in a field that has very low nitrogen and sulfur levels, then the protein content may be low. And depending with what uses you have for the grain or who is your customer for this grain, you may get paid less. Okay, then in terms of pest diseases and weed management, I have these resources here which go in details in terms of what pests and diseases affect oats, and I highly recommend that you check them out. Again, important to scout the fields regularly. Pest management is linked to both variety selection and agronomy, because some varieties or cultivars of oats are more disease resistant than others. And so that is very important as you are making the decision of which cultivar am I going to grow. It's important to ask and find out if there is, if you in your region there are cultivars that are more disease resistant for the diseases that are prevalent in that region, or pest resistance. In terms of weeds, we talked a bit earlier, there's a lot that you can do beforehand. As I said, even with the planting density, with the row spacing, with your choice of field and not choosing a field that has a history of having like wild oats. So you can do beforehand, but also you can control it by weeding. And integrated pest management is the cost-effective and it reduces the selection of pesticide resistance. And this is an approach where you're using multiple methods of pest control. There's a lot more information that is available in these resources that I have put here. So now let's talk about harvesting. There are two main methods of harvesting oats. One is combining. This is where you directly harvest the grain in a sacks, and ideally this should be done when the moisture content of the grain is 14% or less. The other method is called swathing. This is where, while the oats, when they are not fully dried or uniformly dried, you can cut them and you just leave them in the field like this, and they dry. The moisture content is just going to decrease, and then you can come in and collect them and thresh them. So this is ideal for fields that have uneven maturity or they have heavy green weed pressure. So for example, if your crop has already matured, they will look they will have this golden color. But if between your crop you had a lot of weeds that is green, like still has a lot of green leaves, this is a good method to of harvesting compared to this one, because as you harvest with this one, you may take in a lot of the green weeds, and some of them are even damaging to the combine harvesters, for example. Or if you are growing in an area that has unfavorable harvest weather, you have very short windows for having dry weather so that you can harvest with a combine. This might be another approach that you can use, and it also allows you to harvest while the moisture content is still high compared to this method. The swathing method is especially favorable for naked oats because, like I said, naked oats are more prone to shattering. So once the oat starts drying or maturing, naked oats tends to drop the grain on the ground more often than common oats. So in that case, it's very important to use this method with naked oats. What are some of the equipments that you can use? Again, just like with planting, it depends with what is available to you in terms of technology, in terms of resources, labor costs also. But here are some examples. Simple ones include like using a sickle, which is this tool that this gentleman is holding here. You just walk and cut and bundle the oats, and then you thresh. This is also called a scythe. That's what I learned. I've never seen one of them, but I see that it used to be very popular in the US before combines were a thing. And I wonder if any of you have seen this being used. At least I know I had seen a sickle, but I've never seen one of these. Curious to use it. I also got to use this for when I was working on my PhD, which was so it was quite a process, but there's some satisfying feeling about cutting. So there's that. And then of course we have the combine harvester, which cuts and threshes at the same time, very convenient, but also very high cost in terms of capital. Then there's this other method where it's called a grain binder and bundling machine. So the grain, the machine is being pulled by animals, and then the grain is cut. This section cuts the grain, and then there's like a conveyor belt, and then the bundle, you tie the grain and you drop it, and then you just have other people coming along and picking up the bundles, and then they are threshed. This is what threshing looks like, but this is a snapshot, again, depending on the context. So, for example, this is a combine, so the grain is being harvested and being threshed immediately, and that process is already done and completed in the field. This is a process where if you cut it and you cut it and bundled, then now you can move into threshing. And these are examples of threshing like that. This is also another method of threshing where you harvest the grain and you just hit it against a hard surface, or you can bundle them and then you just use sticks to get the grain off of the stalk. This is a method that is very common in where I grew up. And then after, if you're using any of these, for example, these threshers will typically have a blower, and so this will blow away the chaff and you will get clean grain. But if you're using these methods, you also need to go another step of cleaning. You can use a sieve and just shake, or you can leverage the wind and just blow the chaff away through this method. This is a method I'm used to back home. So what do the oat grains look like after harvest? If you're harvesting common oat, this is what it will look like. Why? Because it has the hull. But if you harvest the naked oat, this is what it looks like. But I should mention here, it doesn't always look this perfect because often there will be some common oat types mixed up with naked oats. And so there might be an extra step to reduce or to remove the common oat. But if you get clean seed, and if you do so, well in terms of the agronomic practices, removing like volunteer oats or weeds, wild oats that have been growing in the field, then you may be able to get a clean looking grain. So in terms of storing oats foliage occurs when initial temperatures range from 0 to 21 with respective moisture levels. So it's combination of mainly two factors. That's the temperature and also the moisture content, which is why it's very important to harvest at the right moisture content and aim for 12 to 13% moisture for longer storage. And if it is for short-term storage, 14% is okay. I have added here this resource that goes into detail about how to store the oat grain. So after harvest and storage, what are the post-harvest processes? This is where the naked oat and the common oat, they diverge, because when you harvest the common oat, it still has the hull, and so there's an extra step called dehulling to remove this hull so that now you can get to just the grain. But if you are planting naked oats, you harvest and you already have the naked oat, and that means you can instantly now go into the oat grain products. Some of the common products include the flour, rolled oats. This is groats, which is basically this. It's called an oat groat, the naked oat, or steel cut oats, instant oats, or quick oats. Some of the other food products, oat is generally known across cultures as a breakfast food with different, prepared in many different ways. Some of these are the brands that I've seen here in the US. Also, it's used in snacks and baked goods like cookies and flour, composite flours, where it's mixed up with other cereals. And for example, growing up, this is what I saw with Mix, which is also a breakfast product. And more recently, we've seen an increase of oats being used for oat milk, which is a dairy alternative. And these are some of the products. But also, if you go on YouTube, you will find a lot of videos that show how you can make oat milk at home. Another use for oats is as an ingredient in skincare products. We've seen in the recent less than 10 years, there has been such an increase in these products in the market. And these are the two main ingredients that are derived from oats that are used in skincare. One is colloidal oatmeal. This is finely made by finely grinding whole oat grain. So once you harvest, you just finely grind it, but sometimes they will cook it and then finely grind it. And then that powder is what is added to lotions or other products. The other one is maybe they make oat milk they will cook the oats and then they extract the milky emulsion and then they add that into the skincare products. And it doesn't have to go through like refinement. Also, people can have come up with many DIY or do-it-yourself alternatives of using it directly. So this is an example of where naked oats are advantageous over common oats, because once you harvest the naked oats as it is, you can make the colloidal oatmeal and you can make the oat milk. But if you harvest the common oat, you need to have a means to remove the hull before you can make any of this. And these ingredients, they help with dermatitis and eczema. So oats is used as a cleanser. It has properties that make it a good cleanser, moisturizer, and also used for anti-inflammatory, as an anti-inflammatory agent. So another use for oats is in forage production. So what I was covering was the uses of oat grain. In forages, oats have high biomass production. They have excellent forage quality and high digestibility, and they are more palatable in comparison with other cereals like barley or rye or wheat. And also the seed cost for oats is lower than these other cereals, so which is an advantage in forage production. This is well suited for hay, for silage, for green chop, and just grazing. It has a flexible planting, well, depending on where you are located. So like here in the US, I'm in what's called the Midwest region, and we have the spring season and the fall season, which are cool season, because like I said earlier, oat is a cool season crop. And so it's possible to grow oats in the fall, and it's possible to grow oats in the spring, which provides farmers with alternatives for when you can grow oats for forage. It performs well in cool, moist environments, and it's often grown in mixtures with legumes, for example, peas. And this is done to improve the forage yield and crude protein. Because, for example, if you're growing peas for forages, they have very high protein content, but they may not yield as much biomass. But oats, they produce a lot of biomass, but they have low protein content. And so they are often intercropped, just intercropped oat because it's a grass and a legume. And then you have a high yield and you have high quality forage. Oats, the grain is also used in animal feed, like feeding pigs, feeding poultry, horses, and goats. And it is an energy-rich feed source because of all the other nutrition benefits that I talked about earlier. And so it is suitable for diverse feeding systems. So for example, if one has a farm where they have chicken, they have pigs, they have goats, they have cattle, there's flexibility with just one crop because you can grow it for forage, you cut it, feed the cows or the goats, and at the same time, if you decide to harvest the grain, you can use the grain to feed the other animals. So it has a lot of flexibility in a system. Another use of oats is in weed management and as a cover crop. So oats are known to establish quickly, like they emerge very fast compared with other crops. And that means they have an advantage over weeds in the sense that they will have already really grown and started to take up the nutrients before weeds come up and compete with them for light, water, and nutrients. Therefore, they produce a very good soil cover and they're used as a cover crop. So for example, in those seasons where a farmer is not planting their main crop, maybe maize or corn, then they can plant oats or instead of leaving the land just fallow. And this is important because if you just leave the land bare and there's still moisture, the weeds are going to come up. Well, if you plant the oats, then they will first of all control the weeds, but they will also be an alternative source of nutrition, maybe for you can use them as a forage, as I talked about earlier. One cool thing about oats, cool but also can be bad, is that they have what is called allelopathic effect. This means that oats, in their roots, they release some compounds which inhibit the germination of other plants around them. So this is why they are very good in terms of preventing weeds from growing. But also, if you are intercropping them or you're growing them next to something that matters to you that you want to harvest, then you have to put that in mind because they may affect the productivity of the next crop. They are commonly used in systems where farmers are transitioning from conventional farming to organic farming, because as part of the certification process, there is a requirement that the land is not, you have to break from using the conventional system to transition. And during that period, it's important to plant something that can take up the residual herbicides or any residual things in the soil that are not good. And so oats are typically used during that time to provide a non-chemical weed control option because, like I said, they are good at keeping weeds away. And so if you can plant them, and because you don't need to use chemicals, that can help you as you're transitioning to an organic system. The other points here just make the same, they solidify what I was saying earlier. And I added one cool use of oats here that I never knew about until last year. So oats are used to, they are grown and sold even in packs, which has like some soil and oat seeds. And then you just water that pack. And then you have this, what is called cat grass. And this is part of the diet of cats. And so for people who have pets, this is a product that is being sold. And also it's an opportunity for business for someone to prepare such parts. So cat grass is not required. It's not a required part of cat's diet. If the food the cat is eating is well balanced, but it is something that many cats enjoy. It's not uncommon to see cats eating grass outside. And especially for places where they have indoor cats, it can be a source of environmental enrichment, provide some micronutrients. And the reasons why cats eat grass is still unclear. But that is an area where you find oats being used or being sold to grow cat grass. Okay, so that covers generally the oats, the most common uses of naked oats and just oats also in general. So what are some opportunities for naked oat in international ag? I have an example story here whereby, for example, this is from Nepal. So Anup, who is my former colleague, is here and he's from Nepal. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. But oats was introduced in the 1980s as a fodder. And it became a game changer because previously the farmers would travel long distances to go and daily to go and collect grass and other forms of forage. And when now oats were introduced, they became an accessible source of forage because they can be grown within the farmer's compound or their fields. And also like so they can be grown within the field. And for places that have mountains, they can also be grown in the borders. And so this captures a story of and there's more, you can find it here, of an instance where a crop has been introduced. And by introduction, it reduced it has contributed to the reduction of women's labor burden, or in other communities, this would affect the primary persons in the family who are responsible for feeding the animals. And it also, because of this, there was improvement also in livestock nutrition and increased milk yield. So this is an example of how introducing oats as a forage, depending on the context also and how well oats do in that area, they can help in improving nutrition for the livestock, and also it can improve the labor burdens in a farming family. So other reasons why naked oats have are relevant in sustainable ag development is that they are smallholder friendly crop. And this is mainly because of that feature that that you don't need to dehalve. There's no extra step after you harvest the grain. You can go from harvesting to using the grain as it is. There is low mechanization. So in places where there's not high mechanization available, then that is a good opportunity. It is very versatile, so it can be used in household nutrition, because once it is harvested, the grain can be used to make flour, which can be used to make porridge. It can be used in livestock feeding and also potential income generation through value-added production. It is adaptable across farming system. It's like I showed, it can be used in cover cropping, in intercropping, and that which is very important. I talked about intercrop already. It is well suited for crop livestock integration, which is very important for sustainability through nutrition and also income generation. And it is resource efficient and sustainable. So those are the reasons why I think that naked oat has it's quite a relevant crop in sustainable ag development because of how versatile it is. These are the resources, some of the resources that I used, and with that, and these are some interesting projects to check out if you're curious more about these oats. There's this one here which is about oats and what is happening with oats in Ethiopia, and this project whereby oat adaptation is being expanded to grow in more northern regions of Europe. And with that, thank you so much for your time. And I'll take questions.
Thanks, Milcah. That was a really great presentation that covered all the bases. We can open it for questions and answers here. I see that Jean-Luc put one in the chat early on, and I don't think he's with us anymore. So maybe we'll take questions, and then if there's time, we can also look at the one that Jean-Luc posted in the chat. Questions from anyone? Comments? Looks like Kelvin, you've unmuted.
Yeah. No, thanks. It was really a wonderful presentation. I've actually learned a lot. I think about the oat, I really wanted to find out whether it can be grown in Cameroon, because I've never seen it. I've never seen, but the presentation, I have learned a lot. I've learned, and looking at the area where I see it being concentrated, I see that we have a lot of areas like that here in Cameroon. So I don't know whether it can be grown here.
Thank you so much for your question, Kevin. I think it depends with what region of Cameroon and the climatic conditions. The most important in terms of climatic condition is cool weather and also moisture level. But I would love to sit with you and check like where you're coming from and see if the conditions there would be conducive for growing oats.
That would be a great follow-up outside of this webinar. I see Vicky has posted a few questions and is also unmuted. Vicky, do you want to ask those
Oh,
questions?
okay. How many days to maturity?
I believe it's around 60 days.
Okay.
Mhm.
And you said that they're making hybrids that are more cold tolerant. Um, what is the most cold tolerant that you know of? And can you plant in the fall, have a period of dormancy, and then see a spring harvest, even where it might freeze in the winter? Is that possible?
In terms of cold tolerance, your first question, I would need to check, but I can give you an example of what we were growing here in Illinois, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can see how it compares to, I think you're in New York, right?
A Maine.
You're in Maine. Okay. So here we grow it both. It can grow both in the fall and in the spring. Typically, end of March, mid March is depending on the weather condition. But we are able to plant in March. And then in the spring, in the fall, the main issue we see, okay, let me first finish something. When we plant it around from March or early April, we harvest it in July. And then in the fall, the challenge is really planting early because sometimes it's still hot. So, for example, I planted one time I tried planting it very early in August, and that was too hot for the oats because they are cool climate. But then I found that the last week of uh, August here was a good time to plant them. But then again, if you plant it too late in the fall, then you run into frost. So by late November, late October, we would see signs of frost damage. But I can give you
And
more specific information.
can it be harvested before it seeds for green forage?
Yeah, so in the fall, it was not going all the way to seed, it was for forage.
Okay.
Yeah. And in both seasons, you can have green forage.
And what is the uh, opportunity to get naked oats in the US? Is it easy to find it or to plant?
Yes, it is easy to find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Good
Um,
presentation.
Thank you, Vicky. Jean-Luc, I see you had a question. What if you look at naked oat to the growth of if you compare the naked oat to the growth of the common oat, how do they compare from a nutrition perspective? Based on what I saw briefly as I was doing the research for this presentation, is that the protein content was less, for example, in the growth of the common oat, and it's connected to that trade-off where the nutrients in the some of the nutrients, plant nutrients are going towards the hull. That being said, that's also relative to the variety that you are comparing them. But generally what I saw is that the naked oat has higher protein content compared to the growth of the common oat. I hope that answers your question. Oh, he's no longer here.
Jean-Luc has dropped off, but that's
Okay.
good input. I think too, there's sometimes, Milka, you would know more about this. There'll be an assessment of yield, and you really have to look at the yield of the groat itself to
Mhm.
understand whether yield levels are, sort of lower or higher common oats to naked oats, because otherwise you could be weighing the hull, which doesn't really have a use, and if anything, it's an impediment to some growers using oats, and that extra weight would then be accumulated at the gross yield level, and that might not be an appropriate comparison.
Okay. Um, Emma, you asked a question about 25 degrees Celsius. I wanted to compare with what that translates to Fahrenheit, but going off of my senses, just temperature, thank you, 77 Fahrenheit. I think that's still a conducive temperature. And how quick, and I have a follow-up question for you, Emma. How quickly does it transition? Does the season for this farmer transition to higher temperatures? Like, what does that window look like?
I was kind of just asking as a hypothetical for people in our network who, might be in the highlands, but they might not have a very long cold season. Though you said, the time to harvest was only about 60 days, which is pretty short. And
It's
especially
to harvest. To harvest is 120.
Oh, 120. Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
there might be a lot of people who don't have quite that much of a cold season, in which case they could use the greens for animal forage, like you said.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, if they wanted to plant a little bit ahead of time, toward the end of the warm season, and then they would be flowering and setting seed during that shorter cool season. I'm just curious, how quickly the germination drops off once you get above kind of that ideal threshold.
I think also because the germination period is really quick, they are very quick to emerge. And so it's like up to 10 days. So unless you plant and like really coincide with a heat wave or something like that, most times the germination and emergence will be okay. But after that, that's where you might see a struggle in the crop if the temperatures escalate within a very short time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any final comments or things you'd like to highlight? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say this is a great presentation, and I can see that it would help a lot of young farmers in choosing what crops and especially with the lack, they don't have to have a combine to de-hull it, and it would decrease the threshing time. And I think that would actually be a great crop up here in Maine for people to grow, because it would be less labor, and it was really great for chicken growers up here. And a lot of people grow chickens, but I don't think they think about growing oats. So that is a great thing that we can use for education.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Yep, and on my end, I don't have any other comments, Brian. I'm just grateful for everyone who showed up. And I will be sending a follow-up email to you, Kevin, and because I would like to sit and check, learn more about the growing zone, and also, Emma, if you have more information about where the intended area to grow the oats, I can provide more information.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think I would like to be invited in such meetings again. It was very, very nice being part of the webinar. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. And we have more webinar recordings on the YouTube page, the SPI YouTube page, so you can find more presentations.
Oh, okay.
Indeed. And we'll post this one there as well when it's ready. Thanks to everyone, and have a great day out there.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.